Today we have a special guest, my friends, named Jennie Ketcham-Crooks, and she is the founder of a West Coast Anxiety Clinic and a top expert in the field, especially relating to anxiety and OCD, which I know a lot of our guests struggle with. She opens up about her personal journey from struggling with anxiety, addiction, and trauma to becoming a leader in the mental health industry. She even shares some incredible stories and key pivotal moments in her life. You guys are going to love this. She gives us great practical tips and relatable stories that are all about resilience and self-compassion and finding joy, even in those tough times, which we all need. Stay tuned. Hey parents, welcome to Fulfillment Therapy. Do you want to raise your kids better and have a stronger marriage? Are you up late at night researching marriage and parenting tools and self-care tips? Do you start each day hoping for deeper connections and less chaos, but it ends with family arguments and going 12 different directions again? My name's Kendra, wife, mom, therapist, and growth enthusiast. It wasn't until I discovered how to fulfill my unmet needs that I was finally able to show up as my best self, as a spouse and parent. I realized that by meeting my needs, I could more fully meet the needs of my family, with more energy and less resentment. In this podcast, I teach parents skills like boundary setting, prioritizing personal needs, communication, and claiming ownership. Just like my clients, you'll be shocked by the improvement in your marriage, parenting, and personal life when you focus on fulfilling your important, unmet needs. Ready to prioritize yourself so you can quit mentally throat punching people? Then grab those earbuds and head outside, and let's walk and talk. We have a special guest, Jennie Ketcham-Crooks, and she is the founder of West Coast Anxiety Clinic. And she's a clinical licensed social worker and an anxiety and OCD specialist. So before she started the West Coast Anxiety Clinic, she was the director of clinical education at Seattle Anxiety Specialist. That's a mouthful. And before that, the lead medical social worker at the Poly Clinic. Jennie's been involved in research at the University of Washington and a guest lecturer at Harvard University. She appeared on several popular television shows from Headline News to The View and Oprah, and she's also been on, which I just listened to a little bit ago, Dr. Drew's podcast, probably among several others. So I am so excited to have you on the show today, Jennie. Thank you for joining us. I really appreciate you being here.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Kendra. I'm super excited to be here.
So glad, and especially because you are, well, I suppose we can call you an expert when it comes to OCD and anxiety, and I feel like that speaks to so many people, especially anxiety. Like our listeners want to hear about that all the time. Those are our big podcast episodes that people keep returning to, so I'm really excited to pick your brain about that.
Well, I'm excited to be picked and also notice my own anxiety at the word expert coming up in the same sentence as me. So we'll just roll in this together and see what happens.
Let's just jump right in then. The question that I have to start with is, I'm wondering if you can share your journey that led you to specialize in anxiety and OCD and also starting West Coast Anxiety Clinic. Now, I know that's kind of a loaded question, but whatever you're willing to share, I'd love to hear.
Yeah, sure. So I have my own historical, I think like so many humans have my own historical struggle with anxiety. And what that really looked like for me in my late 20s, I was previous to becoming a therapist, I was actually in the adult business. And I was so concerned about how I would be perceived if I tried to leave the adult business that I just stayed in. And so anxiety in my life was serving this really interesting function where all of my behavior sort of narrowed. And the thing that I didn't want became the thing that I did, right? Like, I don't want to be here forever, but I don't leave. So I just kept being there. Yeah. And so I ended up doing this Dr. Drew rehab show, and it started to change my life. I mean, aside from the fact that I couldn't drink Jack Daniels or use illicit drugs, and people started calling me Jennie, and I had no idea who that identity was outside of this one that I had created. I started working with a therapist and a psychiatrist who really helped me overcome some of these narratives that I had so finely followed in my head, right? And so much of that was just anxiety. Like, what if I fail? What if I'm rejected? What if I apply for a host position and they laugh at me because the past 8 years of my life have been devoted to things that are not necessarily transferable into
Right.
hosting at a restaurant, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I think I had that inside experience, that inside out experience at the outset. When I started working at the polyclinic as their medical social worker, I started seeing this thing where so many of the patients who were coming in were struggling with anxiety and in really quiet, curious ways, right? We had people coming in who couldn't figure out why they were always so easy to start, right? And after, I don't know, 10 minutes of conversation with them, it was clear that they had PTSD, right? But had never had a touch point or someone who could accurately assess or diagnose that's what's happening for them. And then as soon as they had that diagnosis, we knew where to go, right? So that anxiety quiets down. I had a bunch of people who would contact the physicians all the time, like so many my chart messages, right? And it's like, okay, well, this behavior is functioning in some way, and the physicians would scramble to respond and the medical assistants, everybody's scrambling to respond. And, with a trained eye, you start to realize like this person has health anxiety. And the way that the physicians are responding is actually reinforcing that anxiety, right? It's teaching the patient that they need to come to the physician to get that relief, right? And so I started to see anxiety creep up in all of these really quiet and nuanced ways in places where people weren't necessarily saying, I feel anxious, right? And I thought this is a pretty interesting thing. And so I jumped into private practice with Seattle Anxiety Specialist and really started to fine tune my craft there. I started West Coast Anxiety in large part because, every day in session, I ask people to do things that terrify them, that, that like legitimately terrify them, whether it's working with somebody who is afraid of dogs or somebody who's afraid of heights or somebody who has OCD and they're afraid that they might accidentally stab somebody if they're near a knife, right? Like every day I'm like, well, let's go see a dog or let's hang off the side of the roof and see if we can tolerate it, or let's hold this knife up to my throat and see if you accidentally murder me, right? Like every day I work with people and I invite them to face their fears. And I've always wanted to own my own practice. I've always wanted to work with a group of clinicians who specialize in this area, but who are extraordinarily skilled in very specific treatment modalities. So specifically exposure and response prevention and ACT. And I've always wanted to do that, but I didn't think I was good enough to do it. And so it was that same narrative, right? Like, what if I fail? What if I'm rejected? What if they don't love me, right? That same narrative that I was following that was keeping me at this place where Seattle Anxiety Specialists, they're great. Like I had a great time. It was a great practice. I had a lot of friends there, and it wasn't the thing that I really felt pulled to do, right? And so anxiety and fear was keeping me in place. So I really took a cue from my clients and took a leap. And there are ups and downs, as with any new venture, waves of despair and hopelessness sort of mixed in with pure elation and like, oh my gosh, it's actually happening. And those like the peaks and troughs are much less. It's like it's sort of evening out after a little bit of time and practice. But yeah, I'm immensely grateful to my clients for helping me see what's possible for myself.
Like where you came from versus where you are now. That narrative doesn't have to stay the same. Like you can lean in, just like you encourage your clients. You can face those fears, like imposter syndrome or all these different things. And that slowly but surely, as you keep leaning in, like what you can become. Like I love how you talked about, you started in this place where you were needing rehab, you're in the adult business, all of these things that just seem for most people hearing your story that would be insurmountable. Like if anyone would have a reason to just say, I'm a victim, I can't do it, like it's too much. Like you have excuses to not push yourself and overcome that. And yet you did. And now what you have done from that is just incredible. I love your story. So thank you for sharing that. But yeah, it's just incredible from where you came from. And did you say in rehab and when you were on Dr. Drew's show, that was about what age? I don't remember if you spoke to that.
Oh gosh. No, I didn't speak to that. So I was 26 when
Okay.
I checked into the rehab. I started in porn when I was 18, and that was my first adult career.
Yeah.
And then I checked, and even checking into rehab, there was such a disconnect because I thought, oh, this is going to be great for my career.
Right.
Because, I'm a porn star. Like, of course I go to sex rehab. It's sort of like, it's like brand aligned, but, back to that like disconnect between like what is actually happening out here, right? Which is like no Jack Daniels. You're actually in rehab. You're actually getting treatment versus what I think is happening in here, which is this like, this really specific narrative.
Yeah. And such a fit. I mean, completely, right? And now you spoke to so many things I want to bring up if I could, but you talked about health anxiety. That's something that I see a lot in my clientele, more than I even expected. And the rising generation, like my daughter had talked about that a lot. And I thought like, hey, I've got a lot of tools. My husband's also a therapist. And so we're like, we've got this, we can nail this, but it's so interesting. Everybody's on their own journey and it can look so different. It's like, how do you help them all? And I guess that's my question for you. What do you recommend to your clients, especially when it comes to health anxiety, but little things they can do that you find very effective that they can start with?
So I think a great place to start is to look at what are the behaviors that you're doing when you feel yourself feeling anxious, right? Like, I think having that perspective taking ability, being able to witness yourself as this non-judgmental scientist and see like, oh, actually, like when I feel anxious, I'm on my chart in like 15 minutes. I'm emailing my person and I'm asking them questions and then I'm checking. I am refresh. So really taking a look at some of the behaviors that you're doing in response to that anxiety. I think that's a great first step, right? And there's the chance that you can just sort of manage that on your own, right? It's important to note to anybody listening that a lot of the things that we do in response to anxiety is not actually helpful in making anxiety go away, right? Anxiety functionally is designed to make us do something to prevent some threat, right? But if what we're actually battling is anxiety, then we just end up identifying the threat in ourselves and perpetuating that cycle of anxiety. And so if you haven't been to the physician, to a general practitioner in years, and you feel anxious, what if I'm healthy? And the behavior that you do is you avoid, maybe go to the doctor and get a checkup. Yeah. Like maybe go get your annual. Maybe, I don't know, maybe get a pap, see what happens, right? Like nobody wants it, but you know what? We do it. A little swab, you're good to go. If you notice that you're overdoing the behavior, you're checking too much, see if you can rein that in a little bit. See what happens when you start to play with doing a little bit less. And I think if you find that you are struggling to either create a plan to make those changes or it's so intense that you just can't do it, contact a therapist. There are some really great mental health providers out there who can help you navigate that terrain, and you just don't have to do it alone.
Absolutely. I love that telehealth is becoming so big, especially for things like OCD and anxiety. You don't even have to leave your home. You can lean in without it being too overwhelming. You know what I mean? So many great tips there, like that curiosity and just noticing those behaviors associated with it. And I feel like I still encounter people all the time that don't understand the cycle of anxiety and don't understand that avoidance is just going to perpetuate it, make it so much bigger and bigger until it's just insurmountable or it feels insurmountable. And recognizing avoidance will never help, right? Mm-hmm. I love that. Well, thank you for sharing those tips with us. I know that will speak to a lot of people. But another question I have for you today is, what drives your passion for helping people with anxiety and OCD, and how do you stay motivated? Because you have a lot going on. It sounds like you have a couple kids. You're running a clinic. You're doing all of these things. How do you manage all of that?
Yeah. I mean, there's something magical in witnessing somebody change. And I think as a parent, and I suspect you have a lot of parent listeners, right?
Yes.
I think we get to see that in our kids, right? Like my oldest daughter just lost both of her front top teeth and
Yeah.
her little face is just changing. And I can't get enough of it. Like, let me witness your face. Every day it looks a little different. And it's the same with my clients. Every day, there's some little, small, quiet change that is so brilliant and takes so much courage to walk toward. And that, like, I feel super emotional about it. Like, that is so inspiring to me, right? To get to see people do that same thing because I've been inside that. I know how scary it is. And I know how much intention and commitment it takes to continue moving on that path. So between getting to witness people face the things that fear the most and getting to witness my kids become humans, there is this like easy motivation to tap into. And I've done objectively wild and cool things, right? Like Googleably wild and cool things. And this is the wildest and coolest thing that I've ever done.
That's
Yeah,
amazing.
it keeps me coming back.
What I hear you saying too is like that vulnerability piece, that deep level, that almost that sacred space of being able to help people become their best selves. And of course you do that in parenting. That's actually my favorite part about parenting and being a clinician is having a hand in that and helping people become who they're meant to become and just harness that potential that has been dormant for so long because of those fears. And sounds like you're saying the same thing with different words, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's
Yeah.
beautiful. I'm curious, as we've been talking, if you have a success story from your clinic or even just any of your clients that you've worked with that has deeply impacted you that you'd want to share with us today.
Yeah, I've been working with someone they have been working with a variety of mental health clinicians since they were, I don't know, 18 months, 2 years old. They've been
Wow.
having some degree of intervention. And for a long time, they couldn't figure out what's going on with them. They have all of these diagnoses, and some of the diagnoses are spot on. Some are sort of question mark. Some are as vague as you're an indigo child and your soul is stuck sideways in your body, right? And so we started working together and they came to me originally to treat OCD. And I think one of the challenges in treating OCD is that as a society, we use this word obsession in this really colloquial sort of general way, like, oh, so obsessed, like I'm just obsessed with your hair, right? Like that. It's so informal. And they had been using obsession to talk about all of these areas where they found themselves really intensely focusing on one thing. And with a little bit of time, what we came to realize is that they're actually autistic and also have OCD, right? And so there's some things that we're trying to stop them from focusing on, right? Like your special interest, love, go deep. You go as deep as you can, as you want. Find that soothing. We love that for you. The obsessions, yeah, we can let those be there. We're not going to do the compulsions, right? And so like it really just champions like this is actually part of your identity that we don't need to treat. If anything, we need to nurture it and love it and figure out ways for you to move through the world that make your existence in this world a little bit easier. As a holistic person, my brain doesn't work in the ways that neurodiverse brains work. And I love being able to work with someone as they come to realize that it's not a personal failing. It's not something that is wrong with them. It is that like their brains have adapted for this very specific context and the world that we live in is no longer that context. And so our job as support is to create more loving environments for them to exist in. And so in our time together, we've shifted away from exposure and response prevention, and we've really started to reconceptualize the work as gaining more independence, which has a lot of exposure and response prevention in it, right? For example, they weren't leaving the house at all, and we were doing only virtual sessions. I started traveling 2 hours to go see them, and the initial was just meet me at the mailbox. And so they met me at the mailbox. And then the next week it was meet me a mile away. You're going to walk for a mile. And they have some chronic health issues, and walking is actually a really difficult thing, but they can do it. They did it, right? And so each week we've seen them broaden the things that they're doing. And what is happening is that they're learning that they can do the things that they didn't think that they could do, right? And not even that they were afraid they couldn't do. They just genuinely didn't think they could do it. And each week they have proven themselves wrong. And that is so exciting and rewarding to get to see. And I really believe that all of that becomes possible when we can meet ourselves where we're at and we can see that this is just the way my brain works. It's going to be really intense to get on a bus and to not know what to do if there's a technical fail and we have to figure that out. There's a high probability we can figure it out. It's going to be uncomfortable and we don't have to fight against that discomfort. And so, yeah, I love them so, so much in a totally professional way. I love them so, so much, and getting to see their life really start to open, right? Like they've always been this little oak seed and they just need the right amount of water and the right amount of sunlight and some really fertile ground. And they are blooming into this beautiful young tree. It's so cool.
The best part about therapy, definitely. It sounds like you're saying here that as you help them have greater acceptance for where they're at and giving them that love, that nurturing, I can't even think of all those words, but just setting up that atmosphere so they start to believe in themselves without even really recognizing what's happening, just fosters that growth, that ability to lean in. I always think about micro adjustments, and I bring it up with listeners a lot, that 1%. Just don't focus on all these big, huge, overwhelming things, because I mean, my brain goes there all the time even. And remembering just like that tiny, tiny little bit of leaning in today is going to be enough. Is that just beautiful? Especially, you're right, especially when we're dealing with things like anxiety, OCD, depression, all of these things. We all have our own journey, right? That's beautiful. Thank you for speaking to that. And I also loved how you said, it's not what's wrong with them. We all have these life stories, right? These experiences that shape us, but what's that next step? And it sounds like you help so many of these people in your clinic. And sorry, where again is your clinic? Is it in Washington?
Yeah, so we're located in Washington, but all of our staff are licensed in multiple states. And so we have a few psychologists working for us who are licensed through SciPact, and they can serve clients in like 40 different states right now, which is pretty cool.
That's incredible. Yeah, I love that. So how do you cultivate fulfillment in your personal life, if you don't mind my asking, when, going back to what I just said before, when you're dedicating so much energy to helping others, helping your family? How do you do that?
Gosh, so for me, fulfillment comes from knowing what I value, right? I have really crystal clear values, and they are the constellation of stars that light up the darkest nights for me. And so I have a little bit of a check when I am taking on a new project, when I'm taking on a new client, because I like a lot of projects and I love all my clients. And when we're planning a trip, when we're just spending time quiet at home, there's always a moment of this sort of like internal, like, is what I'm doing right now aligned with what's most important to me in my life? This choice point that I can come to. And it's sort of spacious in there. And it allows me an opportunity to decide which way I want to go, right? I know that with like just sitting in the house as an example, right? It is super fulfilling for me to play cards with my partner. We're playing phase 10 right now. I am just a threat in phase 10. Like I am, like bless his heart. He does what he can, but I am a force to be reckoned with in this card game. And that's something that like we get to connect on. We're both deeply competitive, and it is so values aligned in terms of how we want to spend our marriage, not necessarily competing with each other, but competing together, and that's a choice I can make. Or I can just sort of scroll on my phone and get lost in Instagram. That's also a choice I can make. There's no amount of that is nourishing or fulfilling. Like I have never done that and put my phone down and thought, oh, thank God I spent the past 2 hours looking at all of these cat videos. I've just never thought that. there's one or two bangers in there, right? Like there's one or two bangers. I sent them to my girlfriends. I'm like, look, this is clearly us in 40 years. But every single time I have played, even when I lose against my husband, which let's make it known, it is rare it's rare, right? But even in those like dark moments where I lose at phase 10 to him, I am nourished by that time together, right? And so I think for me, it's less about, is there some specific activity that is fulfilling to me? And it's more about like, what is important to me in this life, right? Like, what do I want to move toward? Who do I want to continue becoming? And when I'm on my deathbed, which, fingers crossed, I have a deathbed and I get there. Do I want to be able to look back and see a life spent journeying toward those stars? Or do I want to see a life that was just sort of autopilot and meandering around places that I was either influenced to go or told to go? And I want to look back and see a lot of choices that I made. That to me feels really fulfilling.
Oh, that's beautiful. So many good things to speak to. Let's see if I can remember all of them. But always, yeah, it seems like I go back over and over and over in every episode almost to values and living congruently and how you recognize that building a life where you are doing just that, whether it's phase 10 and winning or sometimes maybe losing. I would never say it. Or
It is rare.
actually, quickly, side note, talking about values, my husband and I just celebrated our anniversary and we went to a water park yesterday, just him and I, and going down all things like racing to the next one. It felt like such a kid, and just that play, that wonder as an adult with your spouse, just going and doing those things. Like that's very much what I value, and making space for that instead of just like, oh, we've got too much to do. We've got a lot of deadlines, this or that, scrolling, looking at the cats, whatever it might be. It's so easy to say, not now, but making that a priority, just like you said. We talked before we started recording this, that you yourself are on a trip and just taking that time to enjoy your life, to pause. I love that you spoke to that. There's a couple other things. What did you say? Like nourishing and doing what you can to find a life where you're not just on autopilot or meandering. That's so beautiful. Thank you for speaking to that. Well, let's see. A last question I have for you today. Just in closing, I'm curious what you would have to say to listeners. Again, you kind of spoke to some of the things that they can do with anxiety or OCD, but what would you suggest, just like that one little micro adjustment that we talked about, where they can improve their quality of life and strive for that deeper fulfillment, maybe in ways you have, because again, you came from such major challenges, and where you are today, most people would think, oh, I could never do that. That's not me. What would you say to them?
I think the thing that helps me most is knowing that this thing inside me, right, this anxiety, this fear, it is the thing that was passed down from my parents and from their parents and from their parents and from their parents. And the thoughts like, oh my God, is this terrible thing that I had? Those are also not mine, right? Those are things that have been passed down through these generations. And in all likelihood, those are the things that kept us all alive over the years. And there's something in holding that tenderly that allows me to stop fighting against it, right? This is actually part of my essence. Like one of the things that makes me the most human I can be is that, like, of being a bad parent. Yeah, for sure. Absolutely. Right. And if I fight against that, I'm way more likely to do things that make me a not great parent. But if I can listen to that and be like, oh yeah, this is the thing that has like kept all of the parents in my line of humans working towards taking care of kids and like loving them and doing better for them. When I can hold that gently and tenderly, I can actually welcome it into my experience, and I can let it be more of a guide than something I have to fight against or get rid of. And so I invite you to really hold all of these experiences that you're having inside of your body with tender, loving care, because they are things that have been given to you by forces that are much greater than you, and they can serve you and guide you if you allow them to.
Oh, that is so beautiful, Jennie. Thank you. I want to reiterate that a little bit once again, really have that sink in. It's almost like having a curiosity about that generational pain, which I love speaking to those things because I don't think a lot of people really understand that. Like a lot of these things were handed to us. We didn't choose these things, and it's been going on for a long time. But holding it tenderly without fighting it, it's what makes us human. And again, going back, that acceptance piece, it doesn't have to be this fight, this white knuckling everything, but it can be in some ways, and I know people might be like, wait, what? In some ways, it can be very much a gift, something that can serve us, just like you said. I think about my own journey and all the things that have happened in my life, the dark, terrible moments that I did not think I'd get through, and how that served me and helped me become so much more than I could have ever thought if I would have stayed in that space. But it did require that tenderness, that acceptance, that mourning with that child self. And that comes slowly over time. It wasn't this really quick journey. I wish it were sometimes quick, but it really is not. I'm still doing it, right? I'm sure that you are as well. But until we were able to do that, then it's really challenging to move forward without that acceptance, that tenderness, that compassion. So thank you for speaking to that and sharing that again. That was a beautiful place to end. And any final thoughts before we finish today?
This has been such a treat. It's been a treat getting to talk to you. If someone is looking for a big dose of little micro changes that they can make in their life, and if they're looking to do that specifically with how they're interacting, say, with their smartphone, they can grab my book and spend a little bit more time with me. I have a 30-day challenge that is literally 30 days of micro changes, and it's called Look Up. It's available on Amazon. They can hit me up on my Instagram as well at Becoming Jennie. And yeah, don't sell yourself short, I think is always my takeaway, right? Like that curiosity. See if you can be surprised by just how amazing you are. And then you'll get to see how amazing you actually are.
That's wonderful. And so you did tell us a couple places we can find you. You said Look Up is the book and Becoming Jennie on Instagram. Anywhere else that we can find you if we want to get a hold of you, or your website? What's your website? I'll put all of this in the show notes, by the way.
Sure. Yeah. So company website is westcoastanxiety.com, and we have an Instagram there as well. But you're better off coming to my personal Instagram at Becoming Jennie.
Okay, wonderful. Well, thank you again so much, Jennie. It was wonderful having you on the show and sharing your insights and wisdom. Again, something that speaks so much to our audience. I know it's going to be very helpful and impactful. So I appreciate it, and we'd love to have you on again. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Love to be back.
Hey friends, I hope you enjoyed today's episode. If you did, chances are someone else would too. Would you take 30 seconds to share this with a friend who's looking for greater family fulfillment? And while you're sharing, tell me what you think about the show by leaving a review on Apple Podcasts. It refuels me when I hear this podcast is helping you. No matter what your house or your hair looks like, I'll meet you back here every Monday and Thursday morning for more episodes. Until then.